Nirvana was a special case in that they specifically wanted to operate separate from the record label. Like, they didn't need the record label to pay their bills for them because they were bajillionaires. So they hired me directly, they paid me directly, and I didn't really interact with the record label at all. So
would it have been differently? Was them paying for the session? Was that their own idea, or was that yours? I'm trying to only ask you things that haven't been asked you about a million times for this.
We discussed that as a method. We discussed that as a method in correspondence and I talked it over with Kurt on the phone. I said, like, if you guys pay me directly, then there's no chance the record label can hold anything up, and you can get on with it, and then you can submit those bills to them and get reimbursed. And he immediately, I don't know if that was my idea or if he proposed that and I said, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
but that's the way it boiled down.
You did that at Pachyderm. You were taking the bigger bands up there. What did you like about that place?
The acoustics in the Pachyderm main recording studio, like the main room of that studio, the acoustics were fantastic.
Yeah.
I loved the sound of a drum kit in that room. There were a couple of smaller rooms adjunct to the studio that also had interesting acoustics. It was a recently renovated, it was recently built studio, so everything was physically in good condition, So everything was reliably working, which was not the case at a lot of studios, and has continued to be a real thorn in my side over the years, just showing up at a studio to make a record and then the studio is incapable of making a record. That's a drag. But I knew I didn't have to worry about that. The residential aspect of it was nice. Like, the band stays there on site, so you don't have to try to chase anybody down. There's no commute. People don't have to look for separate lodgings, and there's no local transportation costs. There was a bunch of musicians in Minneapolis who were accomplished cooks, and so you could hire one of your friends to come out and cook for the band, and they would do it was a drive, but they only had to come out once a day, and they would do a big meal and then make sandwiches and breakfasts for the next day. And so that was a little, you could offer a little bit of side employment to some of your friends that way. That worked out pretty well.
So what did it take? 12 days, including mixing?
Something like that. Yeah. I want to say we were there for a total of 14 days, but I think the first day was just loading and setting up, and then the last day was just shipping and packing up and shipping and loading.
Yeah. And then it all kind of unravels a little bit with the mix.
Yeah, when they got home, bearing in mind that none of the record label people had heard any of their music in a while.
Yeah.
And Kurt had several instances of where his addiction had been a real problem with the band. And so everyone involved in the band had reason, everyone on a business side of involvement with the band had reasons to be concerned about how the band was doing. So they turn up with this record, which I think is a really good record, and also a really good document of the frame of mind of the band at the time. But it's, when the record label hear it, it's the first that they've heard any of this music. So they're confronted with music that's sometimes quite ugly and pretty bracing, and their initial reaction to it is that it's awful and they can't release it and they have to do it again. And the band didn't want to. They liked the record. They thought it was good and it represented them. So there was external pressure being applied to the band by the record company to try to get them to change their mind. And part of that involved scapegoating me to a degree.
Yeah.
And that sounds paranoid, and I would not have thought that, except that I was being contacted by journalists who, one of them literally said to me, I just got off the phone with Gary Gersh, who was the president of Capitol at the time. and he says he can't release the Nirvana album, and it's your fault. So, when there is an active effort on the part of the record label to scuttle a record that their premiere act has just completed, that's an extreme act. That's not like some minor debate about, some licensing thing or whatever.
Sure.
That's not like, oh, they didn't clear a sample. Okay. There's that's a major breakdown. And in the end, the record that made its way into the stores is the record that Nirvana wanted everybody to hear. They held their ground. They didn't redo the record.
Yeah.
They remixed a couple of things, but that was at their behest. And, I have no complaints. I have no qualm with the band about the way
The
that
label,
they conducted themselves.
as far as the label stuff goes, this has to feel just like validating of everything that you've thought about record labels since you were 17 years old.
I knew going into it that everyone associated with that band was a piece of shit. All of their management people, all the record company people, all the professionals associated with those people. I knew going into it that everyone in that tier of the business was a garbage person and that they were going to be awful. If given the opportunity to be awful, they were going to be awful, right?
Yeah.
None of that was a surprise. And it's modestly satisfying that I'm still running a recording studio, making records every day, and those people are all selling insurance or something. I don't know what's up with any of those people, but it's modestly satisfying that that the collapse of the record business has affected them much more than me, in a kind of a Schadenfreude sense. But genuinely, I have no animosity, and I had no animosity toward the band. The band were under extraordinary pressure, and they were in unique circumstances, and they had everyone around them telling them that, this record is a disaster. We're terrified of it. And I can't fault them at all for second guessing themselves. Like, who wouldn't under those circumstances?
Right.